Hello, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our broadcast. I am your host, Susan Thomas, and I pray that you had an amazing week thus far. Because guess what? We have made it to Friday. Yes. And what a blessing it is to be alive and to be in health. And I don't take it for granted. I'm so excited to be able to share with you once again on this Friday evening. So I want to share something with you. A few days ago, I took the time to go into my email, as I normally do, to see if anything important came in. And so when I did that, I noticed that there was a message on top of my email that said, "You're almost out of storage." So as I continued reading down, it gave me an option to either free up that space or to add additional storage. So I clicked free up space, and when I did that, it began to show me all the data that I stored on my phone, and it gave me a breakdown of all the files I had been using and where I was running out of space. So I could either remove those large files or keep it and purchase additional storage. So then I realized, well, it's time for me to declutter my phone, because if I ignored that message, I would run the risk of my phone not operating correctly. Because I realized I used my phone to do so many things, and I had used up so much storage, I didn't realize it until that warning message came up on my email. So today, I thought it would be a great topic to talk about on my podcast. I'm going to talk for a few minutes on the subject, getting rid of the clutter. I'll be back in a few minutes. So we are in the month of November. My goodness. We are so close to the end of the year, and many people right now is preparing for the holidays. Thanksgiving is literally around the corner, and I cannot wait. One of my favorite holidays. Many are preparing for the holiday travel, and others are getting their homes prepared for, family gatherings, festivities as we approach the new year. And during this time of the year, we find ourselves cleaning and decluttering our homes, our rooms, our spaces, and trying to make room for getting new things and getting rid of all the things that we don't need, absolutely serving no purpose at all, but just taking up a whole lot of space, right? And nobody really likes clutter, but we have to realize clutter didn't happen on its own, right? Somebody and something had to create clutter. It began to build up and accumulate over time. Clutter, you don't have no room for anything, really, no space for anything. It becomes a distraction after a while, and you can't even focus correctly. And it can prevent you from receiving new things and occupying that space. So then I began to ask myself some questions. I asked myself, is there any clutter in my life? How did it get there? And how long has it been there? Is there any clutter that is beginning to accumulate and build up over time or even around me? So I started to ask myself, is there clutter taking up too much room? Is there anything that's leaving no space or time for God? Is there any clutter in my life that has become a distraction or affecting my ability to focus on God? Or am I holding on to any clutter that's preventing me from receiving new things from God? So I began to think of that, and I says, wow, when you turn those statements into questions, it really opens up a completely different perspective of the word, because now it becomes more personal and it speaks differently of what that really means. And when you think of the word clutter, it can be applied to both physical and spiritual. So let's look at the book of Psalms 139, verses 23 through 24. And it says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So David, he began to ask God to examine the contents of his soul and to examine the internal spaces of his heart. His prayer gives us some, applicable steps that we can follow to start that decluttering process. And the first thing we have to do is to acknowledge that clutter is there, right? And we can no longer ignore the issue, but we have to do something about it. David, he begins to ask God to conduct an internal excavation and to show him every area causing spiritual clutter. And so when we ask God to step in, and when we ask God to expose those areas in our life, he will begin to speak to us, and he'll begin to reveal to us those areas that need decluttering. And even those areas that we buried all the way in the back of the closet, right? You know how we do when we just throw it in the back of the closet and say we're going to get to it, but we forgot about it. God wants to shine the light on those things, and he will literally cause us to face some deep-rooted issues, even requiring us to begin sometimes to speak to someone, whether a spiritual leader or someone in our life that can give us direction in order to begin that healing process. But one thing we know, we can no longer ignore it or pretend that it's not there, thinking it's going to go away on its own. Because if we do, just like my cell phone, life can become dysfunctional, and it can even affect the people around you. And so David, he not only asked, but he was prepared to listen and to receive God's response. And he prepared his heart for God to reveal to him what it was that he needed to address. And this was evident by his words when he said, "See if there be any offensive way in me." So David wanted to know the truth and the root of the clutter. So what clutter in your life is offending God? Because we refuse to deal with it. Those clutters can eventually begin to drown out the very voice of God and cause it to be difficult to receive the new things God has for us, because we chose to hold on to unnecessary clutter. So in a nutshell, it's time. It's time to clean up and to get rid of that clutter, right? So David ends this psalm by saying, "Lord, lead me into the way of everlasting." Sometimes I think that we can lead ourselves. But when we truly allow God to lead the way, God will do some internal surgery. And we realize that sometimes God will lead us to do some external work as well. But when we allow God to open our eyes to those areas that need decluttering, we have to literally be ready. Those areas you need to let go of, those areas that no longer serve a purpose in your life, God will lead you to that place. And he'll lead you into your freedom and into the way of everlasting. Why? Because God's way is always the best way. Well, I believe I'm going to end right here. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this broadcast on this evening. And I pray that something that I've said was an encouragement and a blessing to you as much as it was to me.